Ars Nouveau is hands down my favourite magic mod in all the mods 10. One of the most important aspects of this mod is source. It's used for crafts, spells and rituals. And there are tons of different ways to generate it. Growing crops near an agronomic source link, burning items with the volcanic source link, or even feeding potions to an alchemical source link. But here's the big question, what's the best way to generate source? Well, today I'm going to show off 6 of the best farm designs that pump out absolutely tons of it. So I think the first one I'm going to show off is to do with the agronomic source link. I mentioned it in the intro, but this is the one that generates source based on plants growing around it. And in this case I've got a really small wheat field, and you can see there was one of the beams went in every single tick that this ends up growing. But looking in the tank, it's 0% full. There's like almost nothing there. So how do we increase the output of this? Now, the most obvious thing is to expand out the farmland to a larger area, and this agronomic source link can do 15 blocks range. However, we're playing all the mods 10, so there's a couple of little neat tricks I can show you to generate tons of it. Now, I showed this off briefly in the tips and tricks video, but I ended up using reeds, and one of you guys in the comments recommended using Cactus. And the way that you make it is by using something called snad. Now, snad combines 2 sand together and you make 1 snad. Snad has an interesting property that it will grow crops on it quicker. And if you give it a redstone signal, it will also force one of these ticks to happen as well, which then brings us on to the redstone clock. Placing this down, it will now put a redstone signal on this snad. So when I place any crop on this snad, it will actually grow really quickly, and every single time it does a growth tick, it will then charge up this agronomic source link, producing some more source. Now, the main reason I chose Cactus in particular and not something like sugarcane is because there's the vanilla way of harvesting Cactus, which just makes this so much simpler. If I place either a drawer or somewhere to collect the items, in this case I'm going to use an item trash can because I don't actually need this much Cactus. If I place this just over here, it will then break the Cactus, and anytime Cactus tries to grow, it will instantly break. We can then combine this with an item collector from Just Dire Things and place it right underneath it, and increasing the radius, and we will now harvest every single bit of Cactus, and it will go straight into the item trash can. And if I place it in there, you'll see it gets instantly removed. Now, do note that some of it's going to go flying off in a different direction, so you probably have to increase the radius quite a little bit. And a further thing to note is that you really need to whitelist only Cactus to going into the item collector, for example, like so. That way, if I drop anything else in the area, it doesn't get picked up. I can also set a whitelist on the item trash can as well, just to be double secure, and then I can hide the render area. I can then place a couple more cactus down, and now we've got 4 cactuses growing instantly and charging up this source jar. And you can see we're already at 38% full, and it's charging rapidly. At this point, you can also see it's probably making a bit of a racket right now. You can go into the settings here and turn down the block wall break in Minecraft, and that will turn this off. And there we go. We now have peace and quiet, and we can still hear other sounds on top of it. Now, with all of the farm designs I'm going to show off, I'm going to do a quick 5-minute time lapse to show how much source you can get from just one of these modules. But since source jars only store a small amount of source, I'm actually going to use one of the unobtainium source jars over here. They behave the exact same as regular source jars, they just hold 10 times more. Now, obviously, if you're in early game, you're not going to be using unobtainium source jars. You will just end up having to use 10 of the regular source jars. But for a 5-minute time lapse, this doesn't really matter. I just need to show you how much source this creates. 5 minutes have now passed, and now we have 60% of an unobtainium source jar. That is 6 entire filled source jars in just 5 minutes. And bearing in mind, that's only come from just 4 of these cactus and snad combinations. If you had this stacked up, or if you increase the size of this, you would end up having tons more source generated. This is probably one of the designs I would use as soon as I've sort of set foot into the Ars Nouveau mod. It produces so much source, and you don't actually need to have this trash can above. You can easily put a drawer with a void upgrade on it, and you'll have cactus for days. And cactus can be used in a bunch of different recipes, including smelting it down for the green dye. So that's farm number 1 done. The next farm I want to show off is a farm you can get on day 1 with starbunkles, and then we can show off a little bit more of a different way that can make it a bit faster. Now, starbunkles can be found all over the overworld, and one of your best ways to find them is by crafting a dowsing rod. The recipe, again, quite simple here, just requiring some archwood planks, and by right-clicking it, it will give you a magic find and scrying effect, which will highlight any of the Ars Nouveau mobs or items, or even amethyst geodes, for example, down here. It will highlight these in your world. So once you find one of these starbunkles, one of these small little cute fellas over here, you just have to throw them a golden nugget. They'll then sort of grab it, do a little dance, and then they vanish and turn into the Starbuncle token. Using an enchanting apparatus setup that I showed off in my last video, you can then craft the Starbuncle charm using 4 gold and the Starbuncle token we made a minute ago. When you place your Starbuncle into the world, you'll see it can store and take different items, and look how cute he is. You can right-click him with the Dominion wand and then right-click some sort of storage for him to call home. You could make him so that he deposits directly onto an arcane pedestal, which means that if you drop something, he will then place it directly onto that pedestal, which will get consumed by a mycelial source link. The cool thing about starbuncles is they will go and harvest source berries. If I place a bunch of source berries around him like so, and then grow them using something like bone meal, or just, let them naturally grow, he will then start harvesting them any minute now. There we go, and he'll place them straight onto the pedestals, which get absorbed by the mycelial source link. That way we've got an agronomic source link which will generate source based on the crops growing, which also receives a bonus because we're growing source berries. And then this little guy is going to be putting them on the pedestal, which allows the mycelial source link to absorb it and turn it into source. Source berry foods also give extra source when consumed by the mycelial source link. The problem is this guy might be a little bit slow. He collects in bulk and then sometimes he'll just idle like I showed a minute ago. So instead what I like to do is store the entity and pop him onto a drawer containing just source berries, meaning that no matter what, he's going to put them all down here, and then I've got a pipe system using the pipes mod to push all of these berries into the arcane pedestals. This means that if we ever overfill the chests, they're going to go straight into the drawer and he's not left around doing nothing, and then eventually it'll make its way down into the mycelial source link. Now obviously you want to be producing more source berries than are being consumed by the mycelial source link, and because we're playing all the mods 10, there are a ton of ways to accelerate the crop growth. One of my favourite ways is just by using a hoe and then using red fertilizer on top of it, placing your berries on top, and that will cause a lot more growth ticks to happen on this crop here. Later game you could also use a lily pad of fertility, and this increases it by a lot. You will see very shortly it also adds a lot more agronomic source link ticks. Some other options include greenhouse glass by actually additions. One thing to note is that the mycelial source link will produce mycelium and then will also produce mushrooms, so if you're not careful you might end up finding some of these mushrooms growing in your world, so just make sure you're aware of it. You can either pop buttons on top of it so it'll stop it growing, or you could just replace this with something like cobblestone. It just replaces grass and dirt with mycelium. You could even completely replace the starbuncle here. So for example, I'm using a Celestigem hoe with the drops teleporter. I can then right-click this, shift-right-click the barrel to bind it, and instead of using all of this dirt over here, I can actually just, get rid of our guy over here and replace it by just breaking that and plopping a source berry on top. And that will then go straight into the barrel once it grows. And technically there's so many different upgrades you could do to it that I don't really feel like I can place this in any kind of place or even measure how successful this is. The main thing I want to stress is that you want to be producing as many source berries as possible, and if you ever get to a stage where you're producing so many, you can then start adding more and more mycelial source links with arcane pedestals to the side with more pipes around it like so. Around mid-game you can start using hydroponic beds and growing these source berries at a rapid rate over here. I couldn't find a way to get them into the garden cloches, so just be aware of that. That's one of the best ways that you can actually let them grow, if not using some of the growth acceleration stuff that I showed off earlier. If you're producing enough source, you can also place a ritual brazier next to your source jar with a tablet of overgrowth, and this will grow the crops insanely fast as well. However, I wasn't actually able to produce enough source to maintain the tablet of overgrowth growing more than it was actually, using. But maybe in your testing you might find something different. So there we go, that's the sourceberry farm. It's not particularly productive as opposed to the snad farm that I showed off earlier, or some of the other farms I'm going to be showing off as well, but it'll be one of the quickest farms you get your hands on. So now I'm going to show you my favourite farm, still using the mycelial source link and the agronomic source link, but I don't think I've seen many, if not anyone, show this farm off. And as just a little hint of how much this produces, have a look at these 6 unobtainium source jars completely filled on the top. The way that this farm works is it's using some of the Ars Nouveau fruits, which still produces the agronomic source stuff that I showed earlier, but this actually produces it a lot quicker because the growth ticks happen a lot faster for the fruits. Secondly, we can still use that same setup as we had before with the pedestals, where we can place the fruits from this drawer into a pedestal, which will feed the mycelial source link from above. But as you can see, it's a bit of a confusing design, so I'm going to build this from scratch with you guys so you can see how we actually do this. Now for this farm, I use the vexing archwood with the bastion fruit, but you can use any of the types of wood and fruit. The way that you find the fruit is it's on the natural trees. If you bone meal an archwood tree, you will not get the fruit. You have to find the fruit on the natural trees that spawn in. But good news, if you do need more of it, you can just right click it with bone meal and you can keep growing it. Now the fruits themselves are actually quite useful in their own right. You can use them to craft dyes. So for example, you can get orange dye here, you can get lime dye from the mendosteen, and purple dye from the bastion fruit. You can also brew potions with them, and some of these potions can be quite useful. The one that I personally prefer to use is the mendosteen because you can make lime dye from it, and lime dye can be used to make slime balls using create, combining a lime dye with create dough, which uses a water bucket, and wheat flour, which comes from milling regular wheat. So you could even use this to make a slime farm. It doesn't matter which one you use, all of these work just as well as each other. It's really just down to your choice. Another thing to note is you can't mix and match the logs and the fruit. So I can't add mendosteen here, but I can add it on the flourishing log, which is the appropriate type for this. The first thing you need to do is decide the center of your farm. You can do this by placing a block in the center and checking on each different cardinal side 4 blocks of space. So for example here, that is the amount of space we're going to be taking up. and same in this direction. So this square here is the amount of space we'll take up in total. So I know that this farm is going to be able to fit in that footprint here. We're going to place a ritual brazier on top of the oak log and then an oak drawer to the side of it. You then need an agronomic source link and a mycelial source link, and you place them on top like so. Now, you don't have to follow the exact same method or the exact same layout that I'm doing it. I'm just showing you my compact method, which I personally use. Then what you need to do is place an arcane pedestal at the back of your drawer. I would then maybe grow about a stack of your fruit. So if you just keep right clicking with bone meal, you can grow basically a stack, and then place them in the drawer like that and lock this drawer, like so, with the config tool from functional storage. So what you want to do is get on top of your agronomic source link here, and you're going to basically make a chess move. If you're familiar with the knight from chess, here you go, this is going to be interesting for you. You need to go 2 blocks in front and then 1 to the left, and you're going to build up a pillar. You can then jump over to here and do the exact same move from here. You can even continue it over on every single side. So what you need to do is remember 2 blocks forward, 1 block to the left. You'll know that you've done this right because if you stand on any single one of the blocks, you'll always end up finding that you've got the correct pattern here. So for example, if I stand here, you've got that, and then for example, if I go backwards here, it should still work. Now do note, the reason I said about the 4 block limit is because the Ritual Brazier's Harvest tablet only has a limit of 4 blocks. So I'm going to give you a mini tip right now. If you use the item collector from Dire Things, you can actually render a small area. And if you position this into the center block right now, you can then increase that to 4 blocks. Like so, and you can see the footprint of this. Now do note, we're going to remove this collector. I'm just using this so that I can kind of visualize where I'm going to be placing these logs. And what you want to do is just keep continuing this pattern. Now do note that I'm going to be placing these logs outside of this pattern. The main reason why is because the harvest ritual doesn't care about the logs itself, it cares about the fruit. So I can place these logs outside knowing that these fruit will still get harvested. So there we go, this is now the full pattern of what we're trying to do here. And the main reason we've now done this pattern is because we can now optimize the amount of growing space we have for each one of these fruit. So once you've completed this, what you're going to want to do is then fill up every single one of these logs with the plant that you chose. So in this case, I'm using the mendosteen. You just want to fill up every single log that is inside this radius. So in this case, what I'm going to do is right click them on the inside of this log, but I'm not going to put them on the outside because it's outside of the radius of this harvest ritual that we're going to be placing in just a moment. Now do note, you don't have to fill up every single one of these logs just yet. You might not have enough mendosteen. So what we're going to be doing is actually doing the ritual brazier early, and then after we filled up every single one of the logs, we can then implement the mycelial source link part. So what we need to do is get a tablet of harvest. It can be done with a flourishing archwood log, an iron hoe, and then an earth essence. Right clicking it onto the ritual brazier and then right clicking with an empty hand will then activate this ritual. You'll see it will work once and then it will say source needed. So that's where we then place this source jar that we said. The source jar can go anywhere within a 5 block radius of this. I tend to have mine on the top, but technically if you wanted to replace this item collector here, which we're going to be removing soon, you could just place it down here as well. But you'll see that the source is going into here and then it's still running this tablet of harvest. And right now we're generating some of the mendosteen. So what you can do if you're out of mendosteen is just let this tablet run for a little bit, grab some of the mendosteen from here and then place them again, placing every single one within that radius that I set earlier using the item collector. So there we go, we've now filled up every single one of the mendosteens in this region. We can then go back down to here and place the final mendosteens around the base center that we set earlier. And technically we can also now remove the item collector and replace a mendosteen just there as well. As it stands right now, we're actually generating more source than the harvest ritual's using and producing this mendosteen. One thing you're going to need to remember is to add a void upgrade to the mendosteen barrel so that if we ever get to that 2000 point, it's still going to fill the barrel, but it's going to void the items. Otherwise, the harvest ritual will just drop the items on the ground and that will cause a lot of lag. But now we can get into the really, really serious production of source. Remember that arcane pedestal that I said earlier? Well, what you can do is add a pusher upgrade onto your functional storage barrel. The pusher upgrade is quite a simple recipe, and what you need to do is just right click it in and then right click to set the relative direction to the back of the barrel. And this should now put mendosteen into this pedestal here, and you can see the mycelial source link is now absorbing it and instantly putting it into the source jars. And wow, look at that, we've already almost got a full jar already. Now this is crazy. In just 5 minutes we have produced a full unobtainium source jar and 50% of another unobtainium source jar. That is 15 full source jars in just 5 minutes. But we can improve it further. Earlier on I showed off the ritual of overgrowth, and you can use the same thing here, but this time it will use the source jars on top. Now in 5 minutes you can see we've still produced a large amount of sauce, maybe 20% less than before, but we've increased the amount of mendosteens in the barrel. So if I wanted to use the mendosteens, I could have it just simply like this and just take the mendosteens out, or if I'm just looking for pure sauce, I can then put another pedestal on the side, add another pusher upgrade, and this time we're going to use the right hand side, and we will now be producing twice as much sauce because this is now being used as well. So I think it's time for a full test of what we've just done. So now using that second pedestal, we have now produced 2 full unobtainium sauce jars and 70% of another. Using regular sauce jars, that is 27 full regular sauce jars. Imagine this whole amount here is just stored up there at the top, all produced within just 5 minutes. Everything is basically just from the Ars Nouveau mod, and even still we are producing an overflow of the mendosteens. This is my favourite sauce farm. I always use this in any single mod pack that has Ars Nouveau in it, just because of how much sauce is being produced, and I can still use these mendosteens because they're being produced in excess. Minus the amount of time that it takes to actually place all the mendosteens, this farm is quite simple to set up, not requiring any additional pipes, any additional things like this from over here. It's just using Ars Nouveau and a functional storage drawer. So the next farm design I have to show is a really simple one that you might already have in your world already, and I'm talking about the Vitalic source link down here. If you have an already existing mob farm, for example this Cursed Earth mob farm that I showed off in the tips and tricks video using the cog blocks and the dreadful dirt, any mob that ends up dying in the vicinity of this, their life force will be converted into source via the Vitalic source link and will be put in any of the source jars below. Now do note there is a bit of a caveat to what will actually be converted into source. The mob has to physically die for it to be turned into source. So for example, if a player kills it, that will be turned into source. If something like a mob crusher over here, if that kills it, that will also be turned into source. Something like the mob crusher from Industrial Foregoing, it doesn't actually count because it doesn't kill the mob, it just sort of despawns the mob and then adds its drops into the crusher. So do note that it has to actually count as a kill to create source. It's a really terrible setup. There's not actually any item collection here, it's just a mob masher with sharpness upgrades, some mob fans here, and then a light on the top. But you'll see if I've got this timer going down here, and then I turn off the lever, and mobs will then start spawning and dying. This will then convert them directly into source, and it'll do this at a pretty alarming rate. Now do note that it doesn't actually matter how many Vitalic source links, it will only go into the one source link. But you can have as many jars as you like, and it will then start filling those up accordingly. This can be really good when you've not actually got that far into the Ars Nouveau mod, and don't have such setups as the farming ones here. You can just plug it into an already existing one, and you're now generating source at a pretty reasonable rate. This next setup is probably the fastest source production I've ever seen, and I'm talking about the lava-based volcanic source link generator. I've got this running in the background with 5 of these different fluid tanks and 2 volcanic source links, and it's already filled up a jar in just the time that I'm talking, and a second one. Oh gosh. I'm going to show you how to build this, but I'm first going to have to explain it briefly. I've got an ender tank on the top, which is coming from an infinite source in the nether. I'm going to show you how to do this as well, and that's coming straight into some mechanical pipes and then into ender IO tanks. And what's happening is they've got a bucket inside them, which is being filled up with the lava and then placed into the volcanic source links. Now I'll show you how to build one of these modules, but just know you can have them left to right like this, so they're all stacking together, producing tons and tons of source. The only limit that you've got is how much lava you're generating. So to make a single slice of this design, what I would suggest you do is start off with the ender tank. Make sure it's on the right frequency that you'd like, and set it off into the red mode, which means output. This means that any sort of adjacent pipe that's touching it, it will now eject into. So we're going to come down here, I'm using the advanced mechanical pipe, you can use any kind of pipe, and then underneath we're going to place a fluid tank right below. Open up this fluid tank, and you're going to be wanting to place 3 buckets in the top right hand slot. Now here's where it gets tricky. You're then going to want to place a glass bottle in the top left slot. Now in the latest version you're not able to do this. I'm not entirely sure why, but they have disabled you putting glass bottles in the top left. If you are playing on a later version, you can always use the basic fluid tank from Mechanism, a really simple recipe just requiring 4 iron and 4 redstone, and that can go in the top instead. But either way, try the glass bottle. If you're playing a later version, you're going to have to stick with this basic fluid tank. All that we're trying to do is just populate this slot so that nothing else comes into it. You're then going to go into the IO configuration, and you'll see the exact same layout that we've got the tank right in front of us, and this side is the one facing us. You're going to click this so that it's push and pull, then you're going to close the inventory and place an arcane pedestal on the side. If it's working as intended, you'll see the lava bucket now in that place. You can now place the volcanic source link right below, and it will start absorbing the lava from the lava bucket and then sending it back and forth through the tank. It will shoot out the lava bucket, it will be absorbed by the volcanic source link, and then the bucket will get sent right back in to this slot up here, then turning it back into a lava bucket. Now you can place any of your source jars below, and it will now fill up those source jars through the volcanic source link. And when I said you could stack this design, what I mean is you can have the exact same fluid tank setup like so, place your volcanic source links, and then connect them all with pipe. and then the arcane pedestals. Obviously place your buckets and the fluid tank inside. And now this is all working and we've just expanded it horizontally. And the best part is that you can keep expanding this until you start seeing that your lava production is running out. And that's when I'd recommend you stop or upgrade your pipes so that you're pushing and pulling more lava into the system. Upgrading those mechanical pipes to the elite version instantly fixed my problem, and so now I could get on with expanding it further if I really wanted to. So how do we get infinite lava really quickly? The best way I would recommend is by using a hose pulley from Create. It requires copper casing and copper plates. You can make the copper plates using the ore hammers or use the Create methods themselves. You like the mechanical press, for example. You place your hose pulley down and break the block underneath it, and you've now got two sides. You've got the piping side and you've got the crank side. The crank side is where you'll be placing a hand crank. And what you need to do is right click it right until the hose pulley is touching the lava. And so what you're looking for is the end of that hose pulley to have disappeared. So in this example, you just right click and you'll see it's now gone. It's now under the lava, meaning that we're now going to be pulling from this lava lake. You can then attach a mechanical pipe. You can use the Create pumps. I prefer the mechanical pipes because they're a lot easier to set up. And then you place your ender tank here. Choose whatever frequency you're matching in the overworld. And then you get your configuration tool and double right click here to pull out the lava. Now, if you've got an unlimited supply, you should receive a tapping the mantle achievement, which just tells you that you're getting an infinite lava supply. Or if you've crafted the engineer's goggles from Create, you can then add them on your head and it will say there, bottomless supply, the targeted body of the fluid is considered infinite. Fantastic. Which means we can then pump this until our heart's content. Make sure that this whole contraption is in one chunk. I got really lucky here. I ended up making just the crank outside of the chunk boundary, but make sure this is all in one chunk over here. And then you can go into the claim manager, claim the chunk that you're in, and then shift left click and that will force load the chunk, meaning that this will always be active even if I'm no longer in this area. Then you can go over back to the overworld and then pop your tank on top and turn it into the red mode. And you should see it should still keep that 16 buckets filled up there, and we're still filling up the fluid tanks. Perfect. That's exactly what we wanted. So we've now sorted out infinite lava and then infinite source from that lava. Now the next thing I'm going to show you is a farm that I've not seen anyone actually talk about. The best thing is all the mods makes this even better. One interesting setup is that you can have a wall of volcanic source links like so and place a barrel down with a brass funnel on top with any kind of burnable material in here. So in this example, what I'm using is the blazing archwood log. And what you can do is set it to exactly 64. I've then put an item collector over here that's actually going to be collecting these blazing archwood logs, but with a delay of 100 ticks. That means that it's doing it every 5 seconds, and it's going back into this acacia barrel. I've put a fence up on top because if I remove this fence, you'll see that it will actually throw out 2 stacks before realizing there's a stack there, and then it will have to do basically 2 stacks at a time. So you can avoid this by placing a fence. It doesn't really matter. You can have the 2 stacks spit out because at the end of the day, it's always going to go back into this chest anyway. But you don't have to have blazing archwood logs. You can have coal blocks or anything else that's burnable. The main reason I'm suggesting blazing archwood logs is because they're actually better than regular logs at producing source. Archwood logs on their own produce more source, but blazing archwood logs produce even more source. So that then leads us on to the next part, which is creating blazing archwood logs. The difficulty is there's so many different options for tree farms in all the mods that I'm actually kind of unsure what to show you. You could use a create farm using mechanical saws and deployers to place saplings, and that would also work just fine. You could even use the lumber bee from productive bees to produce blazing archwood at a pretty reasonable pace. But I thought, hey, we are playing with Ars Nouveau today. I think I should make a tree farm with Ars Nouveau. So I'm going to show you my ultimate setup for a tree farm. Now, I just want to give a shout out to Zeeg777 and all of the guys over at the Ars Nouveau community test server because I was following all of their videos and this one really happened to catch my eye. If you want a better explanation, I would recommend Zeeg777's video. I think Pilpo also made a video on this recently, so I think I'm just covering the exact same ground. I feel a bit awkward. That's 2 Pilpo mentions in 2 videos in a row. You should also subscribe to him too. He's also a great mod in Minecraft content creator. But I'll show you a slightly altered version for all the mods 10, and I'm going to show you some upgrades you can do to make this even better. We're going to need some of these enchanted spell turrets, which is just a regular spell turret placed in an enchanting apparatus with all of these. The enchanted spell turret just uses half of the regular source cost compared to the basic spell turret, so that's why we're using this in particular. Next to my barrel here, where I'm going to be storing all my items, I'm going to be placing a drawer just for the saplings. I'm then also going to be placing a void upgrade and a puller upgrade, so all of the saplings go into this drawer here. You'll see none of my saplings are now in the barrel, they've all gone into this drawer here. I'm going to place an enchanted spell turret facing me with the spell touch place block, and the way that you do it is by making the spell here and then right-clicking on the spell turret. Anytime you give a redstone signal to this, it will then cast that. And what it's going to be doing is it's going to be placing the saplings from down here onto this block here. We're then going to place 2 enchanted spell turrets like so. The bottom one is going to have touch grow on it. Once you've got that spell ready, you then leave the inventory after creating it, right-click it, and it will now have touch grow. This top spell is going to have touch Fell, and then 4 of the AOE augments. The Fell will actually harvest the tree, and then the AOE will increase the range that does this. You're then going to right click it onto this spell turret here. Now you could have another turret doing something like item pickup, but in this case I've actually just used the Just Dire Things item collector with an incredible radius here. You can see it's at the maximum, it's at 555, and then this is the radius here. So it should hopefully catch everything in this radius. You're then going to want some of these redstone links from Create, and you're going to be placing them on the back side of both of the turrets and one on the side of the drawer. Make sure they're all the same signal, so in this case it's grass. Shift right click them with an empty hand to make sure they're on that sort of radar dish mode, the satellite mode. You're then also going to want one over on the side here, making sure that it's not on the radar mode, it's on the regular mode, with a pulse timer right behind it, set to 2 ticks. You can also place a lever next to the pulse timer, and that will stop it from doing anything until you switch this off. The next thing you want to do now is remove the lever next to the brass funnel, because it needs that 2x2 space here to grow, and it also has roots coming around the side, so we're trying to clear as much space as possible for this tree to grow. So I'm now going to remove that lever here, and you'll see these volcanic source links will start working if there is some blazing arch with the barrel. I'm just going to take this away for now. Now you're going to need a little bit of source to get this whole setup going, because these enchanted spell turrets do use source. So the best way you can do that is just by throwing a few of these blazing archwood logs so that the volcanic source links set this all up. Have a little bit of source left in them, ready for us to begin. All you need to do then is just sit back, press the lever, and it will then grow the tree, collect all of the items, and it will be put straight into that barrel. And it produces these really rapidly. The item collector's working a bit overtime right now. Looking at the netherite barrel, you can see that we're already filling this up pretty rapidly already. It's crazy. And that means that we're having enough juice ready for these unobtainium source jars. So I've just let this run for 5 minutes, and you can see we've already kind of littered the area with a lot of drops that didn't quite get caught by the collector. You can either have more collectors around here that are going to be piping straight into that barrel, or you could use something like the advanced item collector, which has a little bit of a larger range. So if I now look at the barrel, you can see we've got 16k logs. We've got a huge amount of logs. We do not need this amount of logs. Our volcanic source links cannot keep up with this. So I would not recommend having this on 2 ticks. I would recommend maybe having this on something a little bit more reasonable, maybe something like 10 seconds as an example. You can tweak around with this, so finding the optimal setting should be okay. And now you can just sort of sit back, and this will now just be producing source in the background. You can see it's not particularly quick, despite the fact that we're using the blazing archwood. But if you wanted to make this significantly faster, you could smelt the blazing archwood into charcoal, then make charcoal blocks and place them instead of the blazing archwood. That will actually speed up the production of these volcanic source links, but at the added cost that, you have to have some logistics piping in, out, and then maybe a separate barrel just for that. But I think this system works pretty flawlessly as it is. It's also a really good tree farm. As you can see, 16k logs is nothing to joke about. But set this at a reasonable rate, please. You don't need this at 2 ticks. Now, like I said, we're playing all the mods 10, so we can actually improve this setup even further. As an example, I added the advanced block breaker from Just Dire Things with, obviously you need to provide this a bit of energy, and you can get a Celesta Gem axe. By placing a Celesta Gem axe with a drops teleporter, an auto smelting upgrade, and then a tree feller upgrade as well, you now have an axe that can turn trees straight into charcoal. If I shift right click this barrel that I chose and then put it into the block breaker, I can then break the logs and it will turn them straight into charcoal. Now when you've got a full tree, this often ends up being quite slow, so my recommendation is to add efficiency or any other kind of enchantments to your Celesta Gem axe that can improve the speed of mining. We can also go back into the barrel and add an advanced compacting upgrade. This means that any of the charcoal that enters it gets turned straight into blocks of charcoal, which we could then add instead of the brass funnel here. And maybe we want to also lower the amount to something like 16 here. I can then change this to maybe sort of a reasonable number, maybe like 20 ticks every second, and then remove that lever here, and it will now grow the tree, harvest it, turn it into charcoal, and put it straight into the barrel, compressing it down into blocks of charcoal. And there we go. It then pops up the 16 that I said here, instantly turning them into source. And you can see it's a lot faster at producing the source because of these charcoal blocks instead. So you'll actually see that the charcoal blocks will actually fill up these source jars a lot quicker, but at the cost that we're no longer producing this blazing archwood, and also we now have to give the system power. So we don't entirely know if this is better, but it's just an option that you might not have considered before. Now in all of my previous farm designs, I've used a lot of these source jars all lying around, dotted about, and it can get pretty hectic storing all of those source jars. There are mods that make this a little bit easier. For example, you can use Ars Nouveau, which allows you to store it in an ME system, or you could even turn your source into liquid source and then place that in tanks. But one method I quite like is using modular routers, where you can then use a placer module which places empty source jars to the front of the block with a whitelist on just the empty source jar. This will then be filled by any of the source farms you've got available, so in this case I've got a volcanic source link next to it, which should fill the source jar up. You can then have another modular router to the side of it with a breaker module, whitelisting specifically full source jars matching the item components here. This means that it will only break full source jars, and if I enable this, what will happen is it will now break and store all of these source jars as items when they fill up. So you can see that every time it gets filled up, it fills up the jar, then breaks it and turns it into an item form, which I can then carry around to a different place and then place down completely filled up source jars like so. I find this quite useful to maybe have like a stack of source jars at a time for different rituals that you're going to be placing around the map. But there you go, that's just a little mini tip as well. So I hope you found some of these source farms useful and you'll end up using them in your next playthrough of All the Mods 10. Thank you for watching, and if you've got any other tips or tricks to do with Ars source farms, please put them in the comment section. Like last time, I'll try and pin the best ones that I can find. But I'll see you next time, take care.